When I was younger, my mother and I lived in a duplex on the city's outskirts in the late 90s. My mother was home with one of my aunts, while I was at school getting ready to take our cat to the vet, and successfully got her in the carrier. She and my aunt decided to take a break in my mom's room for a few minutes before they had to leave. They talked casually for about 5 minutes when they suddenly heard a click, followed by the sound of something rewinding in the living area. They paused, looking at each other, and listened. Another click, and the voicemail machine began playing on its own. It took a second for them to realize it was playing back their entire conversation. This wasn't the first or last paranormal occurrence in the duplex. Before I begin, a disclaimer. I'm new to this subreddit, and this isn't exactly a new encounter from my end. This event happened to me when I was 11 years old, but now that I'm using Reddit, I thought I should share my story. My mom and dad had just ended a brutal 5-year divorce, my mom winning sole custody over me and my 2 siblings, which caused my father to fall into a spiraling depression. My mother and father lived in separate households, and my father had visitation on certain days of the week, but for the most part, we lived with our mother. Because of this, my father would call us at least every other day to try to keep in touch, but during the Easter weekend of 2011, my father didn't call us for a 3-day period. It was normal if he had forgotten to call us every once in a while, but due to the holiday, it was particularly odd that he didn't. After my mother picked me and my siblings up from school, once we were in the general area where my father lived, and stress had built from his lack of communication, we stopped by his house, which was only around 10 minutes from the school. We originally rang the doorbell, and no answer. We kept ringing the doorbell and waited for an answer for around 5 minutes, but to no avail. We were about to leave and give up before my mom told us, "Try the knob." Surprisingly, the door was unlocked. Inside, there was empty bottles of liquor and junk food wrappers that littered the living room floor. Searching the downstairs area, the place was just a complete wreck, and there was no sign of my father. With that being said, we began to move upstairs. The way the house was laid out on the 2nd floor, there was my father's room, and across from it was his lounge room, but in between the two was a large drop which we called cliffs. These cliffs spanned from the 1st floor to the 3rd floor, and in between the cliffs were 2 walkways against the opposite walls, parallel to each other. My mom and my 2 siblings went along the walkway into the office, and I was following them, but something caught my eye. I saw movement from the opposite walkway, and I instantly stopped. I saw my father in his blue robe and gray pajama pants walking across the opposite walkway from the office into his bedroom. I instantly ran into his bedroom, and there he was, lying in his bed. We attempted to wake him by shaking him and even pouring water over his head, but it was no use. We called an ambulance and he was delivered to the hospital. He was in a coma and had suffered a heart attack and 3 strokes. He later died in the hospital. He had no chance of any mental cognition if he were to awake. I'm not sure if this was my childish mindset during that time, be it I was only 11, or if it was my father's spirit outside his body before he died, but I thought it would be nice to share this story here. It was the summer of 7th grade, 2000. I lived in a small town in a Pennsylvania neighborhood with plenty of kids my age. Almost every weekend, the sounds of kids playing Ghost in the graveyard would ring through backyards late into the night. It was around midnight when 2 friends and myself returned to my home. I decided to take a seat in the curb while we talked about 7th grade boy things. As we sat there, I noticed someone at the bottom of the street also sitting on the curb. I pointed them out and stood up to get a better look at who it was. The moment I began to stand, they did the same. I walked to the center of the street, and they did as well. All I could make out was a dark shadow. I waved, and they mirrored me. I waved my hands around, and they mirrored me again. Everything I did, they did. We were all laughing, thinking it was someone we knew. Finally, I put both my hands up and flipped them off. Suddenly, they stopped. A few seconds of nothing. Then they darted across the street, disappearing behind the houses. Not even a few seconds passed before they come from behind a house closer to us. They had to have come up the street 3 or 4 houses, and there's no way they could have moved that fast behind the houses. They stood there in the middle of the road staring at us. We watched them silently. Then they did it again. Swiftly walking back behind the houses and appearing from behind the house only 3 driveways from where we stood. Finally, we could see that this wasn't a person, but a solid black mass, a silhouette in the shape of a man, roughly 5'5" to 6 feet tall. No face, no features, nothing but solid black. Pure fear filled us as we screamed and began to run. We ran right by my house through the backyard to my friend's house. Our backyards connected. And as we ran through the yard, we saw this thing one last time standing beside the neighbor's garage, just watching us. As far as I know, none of us have seen it again. We all saw the same thing, and we all recall this happening. It's not often I chalk something up as paranormal, but I do believe in these things. This is something I'll never forget. I was living in a college town in East Texas during the late 80s. One night, after dark, I was driving to visit a friend who lived about 7 miles out of town. Pine trees lined each side of the farm to Market Road, which had very little traffic in the evenings. There were no houses along the stretch, making the drive dark. Even in the daylight, there was nothing to distinguish when, year, decade, era, you were. I was surprised that night to see headlights coming towards me in the darkness. Even more surprising was the car was moving very slowly and was weaving back and forth over the center lane. I quickly pulled over to the shoulder, thinking that would be the best way to avoid an accident if the driver was drunk or something. My headlights lit upon a black, early 60s Buick 4-door, and to my amazement, it pulled over on the opposite shoulder, almost parallel with my truck. The Buick's dash lights allowed me to see the silhouette of a man in a hat. Not a cowboy hat, but the type of hat that men wore in the 60s all over the country. I kept watching to see if he was in some sort of distress or needed assistance, but he didn't move. He just sat there, staring straight ahead. I probably should have been more concerned for my safety, but I felt compelled to check on him. I got out of the truck and walked across the road and stopped a few feet from his car and forward of his door. He was a thin, older man dressed in a black suit and narrow black tie. The dashlights made his skin look like a dull green color. He was wearing sunglasses. He sat with his hands on the steering wheel and hadn't looked over at me once. His window was rolled up, so I asked if he was okay in a louder voice that seemed to be absorbed by the surrounding trees. He kept staring straight ahead. I knocked on his window. No response. I rapped harder on the window and asked even louder if he was okay. No response. Not a movement. Nothing. The hair prickled on the back of my neck, and I slowly stepped backwards towards my truck, watching for movement of any kind in the car. As soon as my butt hit the side of the truck, I jumped inside and locked the door, and continued to watch him for a few minutes. Nothing. I shifted into drive and rolled away slowly onto the road as I continued watching through my side mirror. The Buick remained in place, and I sped away. Upon arriving at my friend's house, I left the truck running and literally pulled her out of the house as I explained we needed to go check on something on the road. I sped back down the road to where I had left him. I ended up driving all the way back into town looking for him, but there was nothing. I have no idea who or what I saw. A man in black? MIB type? A lost soul driving, though never moving on? Or maybe just a senile old man out for a drive in his well-kept classic car. What do you think? Throwaway, because this sounds absolutely insane, and people I go to school with know my Reddit username. I know this sounds totally crazy, and I probably wouldn't believe it if it didn't happen to me. I've never been a believer in the paranormal, but honestly, I just have no idea what to make of what happened last night. I will say again, before you read this, it sounds insane, but please know I'm telling the truth. I wasn't drunk or high, and I was with a friend who saw the exact same thing. I go to college at a smaller school in Wisconsin. One thing the school is known for is having crazy parties out in the surrounding woods. I know it's stupid, but it's one way to make sure that campus PD don't come in and shut it down. I haven't ever gone to one of these parties. I've had difficulty with anxiety. But after 2 years of therapy and medication, I finally decided that I wanted to go to at least one party before I graduate. I'm a senior. So anyway, I talked to my friend Gina, who's known as a bit of a party girl, and she tells me there's going to be a big party in the woods this Thursday. A lot of kids at my school don't have class on Friday, and we make plans to go. So last night, me and her head out down into a trail into the woods with flashlights, and we joke about how creepy it was. Everything was going smoothly at first, until we go down a smaller trail that was only about 2 feet wide instead of the normal road-sized trails that usually go through the woods. I was kind of freaked out, but didn't say anything, because I assumed she knew where she was going. So we followed this trail a bit longer, and eventually come to a sort of clearing where the trees aren't too dense, and we see a towel and a few bottles on the ground. At this point, my friend tells me that she got a bit turned around, but knows that we're close to the party, because she's been at this clearing before, and she starts calling out, "Hey," hoping somebody will hear her and shout back. When this doesn't work, she takes out her phone and calls one of her friends that she said she was going to meet at the party. The friend answers, and the friend apparently tells her where they are. Gina then tells me that she knows where they are and that we're close. I joke that she better not get me killed, and as we nervously laugh, we hear a "nya nya" sound coming from behind us, followed by what sounded like a cross between like a whistle of an old train and somebody blowing. It sounds stupid, but almost like the whistle of Thomas the Train, and we turn around thinking, what the fuck was that? And shine our flashlights on a deer standing up on its hind legs, with one arm against the tree looking at us. I know this sounds stupid, but just the way it was watching us and standing there was the most unsettling thing I've ever seen in my life. My friend then takes off running, and I'm still standing there looking at it, trying to make heads or tails of it, before I start running too, after Gina, trying not to be left alone with this thing. Luckily for me, Gina runs into a tree, and I catch up with her and start yelling at her about leaving me alone, when we hear another whistling sound out on the left of us, and turn our flashlights to see another deer looking at us. But this one is walking towards us on its hind legs, but not like a person, like a dog. It gets close, but walks behind a tree with only its head and neck poking out, watching us. I have never been so scared in my life, and I started to cry and started to yell at Gina, telling her to call the cops. Like that would have done us any good. At this point, I honestly thought I was going to die. I was just so scared, and we heard another whistle sound somewhere else in the woods behind us. We heard a rustling sound in the woods, and we were sure that this was it, and we were going to die. But instead, out walked a giant, and I mean giant, like Newfoundland size but with short hair like a lab, black dog. The dog then walked right up to us and looked at us, and then looked at the deer behind the tree, which then started making a nya nya sound like we heard earlier. But the dog just stood there looking at it, not growling or barking or anything, just staring. The deer then started to make a coughing sound, but the dog just stared at it without making a noise before turning around and just ignoring it and walking over to us and started barking and baying. A minute later, a professor who had taken a class with his sophomore year burst through the bush and started yelling at Baron, his dog who had apparently run away into the woods. He was really confused to see us, but saw that we were crying and offered to take us back to his house and drive us back to campus. I haven't slept since last night, and I've been all over the internet trying to make sense of what I saw. Edit. Baron the dog was a black cane Corso. I fully intend to spoil him rotten for saving my life. Edit 2. The medication I'm on is sertraline HCl, but I've been on it for over a year now and never hallucinated, and my friend Gina isn't on anything. Long-time lurker, first-time poster. I'm sorry if the grammar is a bit off. English isn't my first language, and I can mess up from time to time. I've always loved learning about the paranormal. Don't get me wrong, I don't really believe in it, but it entertains me. In fact, if it wasn't for this one experience, then I wouldn't even entertain the thought that the paranormal existed. I never believed in God, and I've been an atheist for as long as I can remember. Ever since I was a kid, I've looked for the logic behind what people consider to be paranormal. It was a hobby for me, learning about the truth behind the myths. But one day, I had an experience that I couldn't explain away. It's hard to explain away something that you see with your own eyes. I'm 22 now, and this happened when I was 15, and in the past 7 years, I've tried to find a reason, anything that could explain what I saw, but I haven't been able to explain it away. Maybe someone here that reads this has had a similar experience and could find the truth behind what happened that day. Okay, this happened back in 2010. I was in the living room with my best friend and my nephew. My best friend, Chevel, was helping me babysit my 5-year-old nephew. We were playing a Dragon Ball video game, and my nephew was watching the action. To put it bluntly, I was getting destroyed. At around 6 in the afternoon, I had gotten tired of being beaten and ran to my room to get another video game. Single player, no more getting wrecked. And while I was looking for a game, I heard Chevo scream my name. Rick! When I heard him call out for me, I heard terror in his voice, and that chilled me to my core. Chevo was older than me, and the closest thing to a brother I've ever had. I was a black belt, and he and I were constantly getting in trouble in fights at school. I had never seen him scared in all of my years that I knew him, so hearing his voice filled with fear frightened the hell out of me. My first thought was that something had happened to my nephew. I ran out of my room and ran down the hall towards the living room, when I saw it. There was a thing running towards me. I was about 5'5" at the time, and this thing was a foot shorter than me. But the sight of it terrified. It looked like a kid, but it was black. No, I don't mean that it was African American. I mean that it literally was fully and completely black. It looked as though someone had fashioned a kid out of living shadows. He ran straight towards me, and I moved out of its way, and when he ran in front of me, I could see his features. Eyes, nose, ears, short black hair. Everything about him was black. He ran past me and straight down the hall, and I sprinted to the living room to make sure my nephew and friend were safe. When I got there, I saw my best friend, white with fear, holding my nephew. He saw me and said, "Please tell me you saw that." I nodded, and I could see relief and fear in his face. I had seen the same thing that he had seen, so he hadn't imagined it. That was good. But it also meant that whatever that was, it was real. We turned on all the lights in the kitchen and living room and instructed my nephew, who was terrified of everything that was happening, to not leave the living room, while my best friend and I each grabbed a knife from the kitchen and began to walk down the hall towards the bathroom to see if anything was there, which was down the hall where the thing was running to. We approached the bathroom, opened the door, and found nothing. We did the same to every room in the house and found absolutely nothing. No windows were open. Nothing was disturbed. We searched the apartment from top to bottom, but found nothing that could point us towards the shadow kid that we had seen. After having found nothing, we grabbed my nephew and barricaded ourselves in my bedroom until my parents arrived. When we were in there, I asked Chevel what had happened from his point of view. According to him, while I was in my bedroom looking for another game, he had continued to play against the machine when he noticed my nephew looking at something other than the TV. He turned and saw the kid just standing there in the living room, not talking, not moving, just standing there. The sight of it scared him, so he screamed my name. The moment he screamed my name, the thing bolted down the hall, where I had my run-in with it. Neither he or I could figure out how it got in or out of the apartment. It simply appeared, and then vanished. The first one to see it was my nephew, but he was too young to clearly articulate what he had seen. All we managed to get out of him was that he had noticed the kid standing there and was curious about who he was. It's been 7 years, and I still don't know what it was. I know I didn't hallucinate, because 2 other people saw the same thing I did. I know it didn't come through the doors because everything was closed and locked, and I have no idea how it could have left without disturbing anything. This is my experience. I have no idea what it was, and I can't explain it away. Has anyone else read or seen anything similar to this before?